Henry strolled through the Central Park, enjoying the crisp evening air. It was one of those rare moments when he could escape the suffocating luxury of his life, a life he often found as isolating as it was opulent. As he wandered aimlessly, his eyes were drawn to a young woman seated on a bench under a large oak tree. She seemed out of place, yet perfectly at home in the serene setting, her presence exuding a quiet grace that immediately captivated him. She was dressed simply, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulders with a book resting in her lap. The light of the setting sun cast a soft glow on her pale skin, giving her an almost ethereal appearance. Henry, usually reserved and cautious, felt an inexplicable urge to approach her. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked, trying to mask the nervousness in his voice. She looked up from her book, her deep blue eyes meeting his with an intensity that took him by surprise. "Not at all," she replied with a gentle smile, moving her bag to make space for him. As Henry sat down, he found himself at a loss for words, which was unusual for a man of his stature. There was something about this woman, her calm demeanor, her serene expression, that made him want to know more, yet he couldn't quite articulate why. "I'm Henry," he finally managed, extending his hand. "Marianne," she responded, shaking his hand lightly. Her touch was cool, almost chilling, but not unpleasant. They spoke for a while, their conversation flowing more easily than Henry had anticipated. Marianne was soft-spoken, her voice melodic yet laced with an underlying sadness that intrigued him. She told him little about herself, deflecting questions with a quiet grace that only deepened the mystery surrounding her. As dusk settled over the park, the conversation turned more personal. Henry found himself sharing thoughts he rarely voiced, about his dissatisfaction with his life, the emptiness that wealth had failed to fill. Marianne listened attentively, her eyes never leaving his, as if she understood the weight of his words more than anyone else ever had. When the time came to part ways, Henry was reluctant to leave. "I'd like to see you again," he said, his voice more earnest than he intended. Marianne smiled softly, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'd like that too." They exchanged numbers, and as Henry walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, something that would change his life in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. There was an air of mystery about Marianne that both attracted and unnerved him. As he left the park, Henry glanced back to where Marianne had been sitting. She was gone, leaving the bench empty, as if she had never been there at all. The anticipation weighed heavily on Henry as he arrived at the upscale restaurant where he and Marianne had agreed to meet. He had been restless all day, his thoughts constantly drifting back to their encounter in the park. There was something about her that lingered in his mind, an elusive quality that he couldn't quite define. As he waited by the entrance, Henry felt a nervousness he hadn't experienced in years. When Marianne arrived, she was as striking as he remembered. She wore a simple yet elegant black dress that contrasted beautifully with her pale skin. Her hair, loosely curled, framed her face in soft waves, and her eyes, those deep, enigmatic eyes, seemed to hold a secret that only she knew. "Henry," she greeted him with that same gentle smile, and all his anxiety melted away. There was a calmness about her that was almost hypnotic. They were shown to their table, a secluded spot near the back of the restaurant, offering them privacy amidst the soft hum of other diners. Henry had chosen this place for its ambiance, subtle lighting, refined decor, and an air of exclusivity that matched his usual preferences. Yet tonight, the setting felt different, almost too perfect, as if it were trying to mask something unseen. As they settled into their seats, Henry found himself captivated by Marianne's presence. Conversation flowed easily between them, more fluid and natural than their first meeting. They talked about books, art, and music, subjects Henry rarely found time to discuss with others. Marianne spoke with a quiet passion, her words carefully chosen, each revealing a glimpse into her soul without giving too much away. But as the evening wore on, Henry began to notice something strange. Every now and then, he would catch sight of something out of the corner of his eye, a shadow that seemed to flicker just beyond his vision, or a whisper of movement in the dimly lit corners of the room. Each time he turned to look, there was nothing there. Yet the sensation persisted, a nagging feeling that they were not alone. "Is everything all right?" Marianne asked, her voice breaking through his thoughts. Henry blinked, forcing a smile. "Yes, of course. Just distracted, I suppose." Marianne's gaze lingered on him, as if she knew there was more to his unease than he was letting on. "You seem troubled," she said softly, her tone gentle but probing. Henry hesitated, unsure how to articulate the odd sensations he was experiencing. "It's nothing," he finally said, brushing off the unease. "Just tired, I guess." They continued their meal, but Henry couldn't fully shake the feeling that something was off. The shadows in the room seemed to dance just beyond the reach of the candlelight, and the soft whispers of conversation around them began to blend into an indistinct murmur, almost like the low hum of voices just out of earshot. He felt a strange tension building in the pit of his stomach, a sense of foreboding that clung to the edges of his awareness. As the night drew to a close, Henry escorted Marianne out of the restaurant, relieved to be leaving the unsettling atmosphere behind. The cool night air was a welcome change, clearing his head slightly. They walked together in comfortable silence, the streets quiet and empty, until they reached the spot where Marianne had parked her car. "I had a wonderful time tonight," Henry said, his voice more steady now. He meant it. Despite the strange occurrences, he felt a connection with Marianne that he hadn't felt with anyone else in a long time. "So did I," Marianne replied, her smile warm, but her eyes still carrying that elusive sadness. They stood there for a moment, the silence between them filled with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Henry took a step closer, emboldened by the evening they had shared. "I'd love to see you again," he said. Marianne nodded, her gaze softening. "I'd like that too, Henry." They exchanged a lingering look before Marianne got into her car. As she drove away, Henry stood on the sidewalk, watching until her taillights disappeared into the distance. The unsettling sensations from earlier had faded, leaving him with a mix of emotions he couldn't quite untangle. But as he turned to head back to his own car, a cold shiver ran down his spine. For a brief moment, he had the distinct feeling that someone, or something, was watching him. He glanced over his shoulder, but the street was empty, the shadows still and silent. Pushing the thought from his mind, Henry got into his car and drove home, trying to focus on the excitement of seeing Marianne again. But as he pulled into his driveway, he couldn't help but glance at the darkened windows of his mansion, a sense of unease creeping back in. There was something about this night, about Marianne, that felt different. He just couldn't figure out why. The relationship between Henry and Marianne blossomed quickly. Days turned into weeks as they spent more and more time together. Despite the growing bond between them, a subtle unease lurked in the back of Henry's mind, a shadow that darkened the otherwise bright moments they shared. Henry had never been one to bring people into his private life easily. His wealth and status often made it difficult to find genuine connections, but with Marianne, it was different. She wasn't drawn to him for his money or influence, at least it didn't seem that way. Her interests lay in quieter, more personal things. A good book, a walk in the park, a simple conversation. It was a refreshing change for Henry, who was used to people only seeing the millionaire, not the man. One evening, Henry decided it was time for Marianne to see where he lived. They had been dating for a while now, and he wanted to share more of his life with her. When he invited her to his mansion, she hesitated for a moment, her expression unreadable, before agreeing. The drive to Henry's estate was long and winding, the road bordered by tall, ancient trees that seemed to lean in as if listening. Marianne sat quietly beside him, staring out the window as the car climbed the hill toward the grand house that loomed in the distance. As they approached the mansion, Henry stole a glance at her, hoping to catch a glimpse of her reaction. Marianne's face remained impassive, though her eyes seemed to darken as the house came into view. The mansion was an imposing structure, all high walls and dark stone, with ivy creeping up the sides like tendrils of some ancient beast. It had been in Henry's family for generations, a symbol of their long-held power and wealth. When they reached the entrance, Henry parked the car and stepped out, opening the door for Marianne. She hesitated for a brief moment before stepping out, her gaze fixed on the house. "It's impressive," Marianne said, her voice calm but lacking the enthusiasm Henry had expected. Henry offered a slight smile, though he couldn't help but notice the hint of discomfort in her tone. "It's been in my family for a long time," he explained as they walked up the steps to the grand entrance. "I've always thought it was a bit too much, but it's home." As they entered the mansion, the heavy wooden doors creaked open, revealing the vast, dimly lit interior. The grand foyer stretched out before them, with marble floors and a sweeping staircase that led to the upper levels. Expensive art and antique furniture filled the space, but instead of feeling luxurious, the atmosphere was cold, almost oppressive. Marianne stepped inside, her eyes scanning the surroundings with a strange intensity. Henry noticed that her hands were clasped tightly together, and there was a slight tremor in her fingers. "Are you all right?" Henry asked, concerned. Marianne nodded, though her eyes didn't meet his. "It's just a lot to take in." Henry led her through the mansion, showing her the various rooms, each more opulent than the last. Marianne's responses were polite but distant, as if she were distracted by something unseen. When they finally reached the living room, Henry offered her a seat on a plush sofa, hoping to ease the tension. "Would you like something to drink?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "No, thank you," Marianne replied, her voice soft. She seemed to be listening to something only she could hear, her eyes darting to the corners of the room. Henry sat down beside her, feeling a growing unease. He had always felt a strange presence in the mansion, a heaviness that he had learned to ignore over the years. But now, with Marianne here, that feeling seemed to intensify. The air was thick, charged with something he couldn't quite define. "Henry," Marianne said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's in that room?" She was pointing to a door at the far end of the room, a door Henry rarely thought about. It led to a small, locked study, a place he had avoided for years, ever since he had inherited the mansion. The key to that room hung on a chain around his neck, a relic passed down through his family, but he had never dared to open the door. Henry's heart skipped a beat. "That's just an old study," he replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Nothing interesting in there." Marianne's gaze didn't waver. "May I see it?" Henry felt a chill run down his spine. He had no logical reason to deny her request, yet every instinct told him to keep that door closed. He had always felt that whatever lay beyond it was better left undisturbed. "It's locked," he said finally, hoping that would be the end of it. Marianne turned to look at him, her eyes piercing and filled with a strange determination. "Please, Henry, I need to see it." Her insistence was unsettling, but there was something in her tone, something almost pleading, that Henry couldn't ignore. Against his better judgment, he reached for the key around his neck, the cold metal sending a shiver through him as he held it in his hand. "All right," he said reluctantly, "but I don't know what you're expecting to find." Together they walked toward the door, the key feeling heavier with each step. Henry could feel his pulse quickening, a sense of dread building in his chest. When they reached the door, he hesitated, his hand trembling as he inserted the key into the lock. The moment the door swung open, a wave of cold air rushed out, as if the room had been holding its breath for years. Marianne stepped inside without hesitation, her eyes widening as they adjusted to the dim light. The study was small, lined with old books and strange artifacts that had belonged to Henry's ancestors. But it was the object on the desk in the center of the room that drew Marianne's attention. It was a small, ornate box, made of dark wood and inlaid with gold, its surface covered in intricate symbols that seemed to writhe and twist in the dim light. Henry had never opened the box, nor had he ever wanted to. It had always filled him with an inexplicable fear, a feeling that something terrible would happen if he ever dared to touch it. Marianne walked slowly toward the box, her hand reaching out as if in a trance. This is it," she whispered, her voice trembling. Henry's heart pounded in his chest. "Marianne, don't." But before he could stop her, Marianne's fingers brushed against the surface of the box, and a sudden, violent shock coursed through the room. The lights flickered, the temperature plummeted, and a deep, guttural sound echoed from within the walls, as if the house itself were groaning in agony. Marianne staggered back, clutching her hand, her face pale. "We shouldn't have come here," she gasped, her voice shaking. Henry quickly closed the door, locking it once again, his hands trembling. The strange energy in the room seemed to subside, but the feeling of dread remained, lingering like a dark cloud over them both. As they left the study and returned to the living room, neither spoke. The atmosphere between them had shifted, something unspoken hanging in the air. Marianne's curiosity had awakened something in that room, something Henry had feared for years, but never dared confront. And now, as they sat in the chilling silence of the mansion, Henry couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been stirred was far from over. The box was more than just a relic of his family's past. It was a key to something dark, something that had been waiting for its moment to break free. After their unsettling experience in the study, Henry and Marianne tried to return to a semblance of normalcy. But the atmosphere between them had irrevocably changed. The box in the study loomed large in both their minds, a silent reminder of something ancient and malevolent that they had inadvertently disturbed. Henry became more withdrawn, his usual confidence eroded by a growing sense of dread. He spent long hours at his desk, pretending to work, but finding himself unable to focus. His thoughts kept drifting back to the ornate box with its twisted symbols, the one he had always avoided, yet now seemed to be pulling him in. Marianne, on the other hand, appeared strangely composed, though there was a subtle tension in her demeanor that hadn't been there before. She continued to visit Henry at his mansion, but each time she did, her eyes would inevitably wander to the door of the study. It was as if she were drawn to it, unable to resist the lure of whatever dark secrets it held. One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner, Henry noticed that Marianne seemed distant, her thoughts elsewhere. She was usually so attentive, always engaging in conversation, but tonight she barely spoke. When Henry asked if everything was all right, she simply nodded, offering him a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. Unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, Henry decided to confront the unease that had been gnawing at him. He stood up from the table and walked over to the study, his footsteps echoing in the large, empty mansion. Marianne watched him go, her expression unreadable. When Henry reached the study, he hesitated before unlocking the door. The cold draft that escaped as he pushed it open was no less chilling than before, but he forced himself to step inside. The box sat exactly where they had left it, untouched yet somehow more menacing in the dim light of the room. Henry approached it slowly, his pulse quickening with each step. He reached out a hand, intending to lift the lid, but hesitated just inches away. The symbols on the box seemed to writhe under his gaze, as if they were alive, whispering secrets that only the bravest or the most foolish would dare to uncover. Behind him, he heard the soft sound of footsteps. He turned to see Marianne standing in the doorway, her face pale but resolute. She said nothing, her eyes fixed on the box, as if waiting for him to make the first move. "Marianne," Henry began, his voice trembling, "we shouldn't be here. Whatever this is, it's dangerous." Marianne finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "I need to know what it is, Henry. We can't ignore it any longer." Henry swallowed hard, knowing she was right, but fearing the consequences. With a deep breath, he steeled himself and reached for the box. The moment his fingers touched the lid, A cold shock ran through his body, as if he had been plunged into icy water. But he didn't pull back. Instead, he forced himself to lift the lid, revealing the contents within. Inside the box was a small, intricately carved object made of what appeared to be bone. It was shaped like a twisted figure, its form grotesque and unnatural, with symbols etched into its surface that mirrored those on the box. As soon as the lid was fully open, the room seemed to darken, and a deep, unsettling vibration hummed in the air, resonating through the walls. Marianne stepped closer, her eyes widening as she took in the sight of the object. "What is it?" she whispered, though the answer seemed to hang in the air between them, unspoken, but understood. Henry shook his head, unable to tear his gaze away from the figure. "I don't know, but it feels wrong." As they stood there, the vibration grew stronger, the symbols on the object glowing faintly in the dim light. Henry felt a surge of nausea, a wave of vertigo that nearly knocked him off his feet. Marianne reached out to steady him, but the moment her hand touched his arm, the object in the box pulsed with a dark light, and a shadowy figure materialized in the center of the room. The figure was tall and imposing, its form shifting and indistinct, as if it were made of smoke and shadow. It had no discernible features, yet its presence filled the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. The temperature dropped sharply, and the vibration in the air grew louder, almost deafening. Henry and Marianne stood frozen, unable to move or speak, as the figure slowly turned its gaze toward them. Though it had no eyes, Henry felt as if it was staring directly into his soul, probing the deepest recesses of his mind with a cold, merciless scrutiny. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure dissipated, leaving behind an oppressive silence. The vibration stopped, and the room returned to its previous state, the shadows receding as if nothing had happened. But the object in the box continued to glow faintly, a dark reminder of the malevolent presence that had just manifested. Marianne was the first to break the silence. "We've awakened something," she said, her voice trembling, "something that should have remained buried." Henry nodded, his throat dry. "We need to get rid of it," he whispered, though the words felt hollow, as if he already knew it wouldn't be that simple. Marianne didn't argue, but there was a look in her eyes that told Henry she was as frightened as he was. Whatever they had unleashed, it wasn't going to let them go so easily. The object in the box was more than just a relic of his family's past. It was a link to something dark and ancient, something that had been waiting for centuries to be set free. As they left the study, locking the door behind them, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to follow them, lingering in the air like a curse. Henry couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the shadows in the corners of the mansion were alive with unseen eyes. And though they didn't speak of it, both Henry and Marianne knew that whatever they had awakened, it was far from over. The object's malevolent influence had only just begun to make itself known, and the true horror was still to come. The days following the encounter with the shadowy figure were marked by an escalating sense of dread that pervaded every corner of Henry's life. The once grand and imposing mansion now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on him, suffocating him with an invisible weight. The air was thick with a malevolent energy that seemed to seep into every room, every object, tainting the atmosphere with an overwhelming sense of doom. Henry tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, going about his daily routine as if nothing had changed. He attended meetings, managed his business affairs, and even continued seeing Marianne, but the tension between them was palpable. The box, the figure, the oppressive darkness, none of it could be spoken of without causing a rift in the fragile calm they were trying to maintain. But the presence in the mansion was impossible to ignore. Strange occurrences began to plague the house. Doors would creak open on their own, shadows seemed to move independently of the light, and the temperature would drop suddenly, leaving Henry shivering even in the warmest rooms. At night, he would wake up drenched in sweat, his dreams filled with visions of the shadowy figure and the twisted symbols on the object they had uncovered. Marianne, too, was affected, She became increasingly withdrawn, her once vibrant personality dimming as the days passed. When she visited the mansion, she would often find herself staring off into space, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Henry noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought he wasn't looking. The darkness they had unleashed was taking its toll on both of them. One evening, Henry sat alone in his study, the room dimly lit by a single lamp. He had been trying to work, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the object in the box. He hadn't dared to go near it again, but he could feel its presence, like a dark cloud hanging over him. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards or the rustle of the curtains in the breeze. Yet the silence was oppressive, filled with the weight of something unseen. As he sat there, a faint sound caught his attention, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere in the house. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder with each passing moment. Henry frowned, trying to pinpoint the source of the noise. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the study where the box was kept. A cold chill ran down his spine as the tapping grew louder, more insistent. It was as if something, or someone, was trying to get his attention. Despite the fear gnawing at him, Henry stood up and slowly made his way to the door of his study. The sound echoed through the hallway, each tap sending a jolt of anxiety through his body. When he reached the door to the study, Henry hesitated. The tapping had stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. His hand shook as he reached for the doorknob, the memory of the shadowy figure flashing in his mind. But he couldn't turn back now. Something was drawing him in, compelling him to face whatever lay beyond the door. He opened the door slowly, half expecting to see the shadowy figure standing in the center of the room. But the study was empty, the dim light casting long shadows across the walls. The box still sat on the desk, untouched, its surface gleaming faintly in the low light. The room was cold, far colder than it should have been, and Henry could see his breath misting in the air. He stepped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. The silence was thick, almost tangible, pressing in on him from all sides. Henry approached the desk, his eyes fixed on the box, expecting it to do something, anything. But it remained still, its sinister symbols glowing faintly as if mocking him. Suddenly the room plunged into darkness as the lamp flickered and went out, leaving Henry in pitch-black silence. Panic surged through him, and he fumbled for the door, but the shadows seemed to move, closing in around him. His breath quickened as he realized he was no longer alone. A soft, raspy voice whispered in the darkness, the words unintelligible, but filled with malice. Henry spun around, his eyes straining to see something, anything, in the blackness. The voice grew louder, the whispers merging into a chorus of malevolent sounds that echoed off the walls. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Henry saw movement, a flicker of a shadow that wasn't his own. He turned just in time to see the shadowy figure materialize before him, its form shifting and undulating as if made of smoke. The figure was closer now, more defined, its presence overwhelming the room with a suffocating sense of dread. Henry tried to move, but his body refused to obey. The figure loomed over him, its dark, featureless face mere inches from his own. A deep, primal terror gripped him, freezing him in place as the figure reached out with a shadowy hand. The coldness of its touch seeped into his skin, sending a wave of agony through his body. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling his mind with thoughts that weren't his own. Dark, twisted thoughts that clawed at the edges of his consciousness, threatening to consume him. Henry could feel his will slipping away, the darkness pressing in on him from all sides. Just as he thought he would be lost to the shadows forever, the lamp flickered back to life, flooding the room with light. The figure vanished instantly, leaving Henry gasping for breath, his heart racing. The whispers ceased, and the oppressive darkness lifted, but the room still felt tainted, as if the malevolent presence had merely retreated, waiting for its next opportunity to strike. Henry staggered back, his body trembling with the aftershock of the encounter. He knew deep down that whatever had been awakened was growing stronger. The box was more than just a cursed object. It was a gateway to something far worse, something that was beginning to seep into his world. As he stood there trying to calm his racing heart, Henry knew he had to do something before it was too late. The darkness was spreading, and if he didn't find a way to stop it, it would consume him, Marianne, and everything he held dear. But the question remained: how do you fight something that has no form, no substance, something that existed only in shadows and whispers? As the night stretched on, Henry realized that the answers might lie not in fighting the darkness, but in understanding it. And that meant confronting the very thing he feared the most. But for now, all he could do was wait and hope that the darkness wouldn't claim him before he found the answers he so desperately needed. The days following Henry's harrowing encounter in the study were marked by a growing sense of urgency. The mansion felt more oppressive than ever, its walls seeming to close in with each passing hour. Henry's nights were plagued by nightmares, each one a vivid replay of the shadowy figure and the sinister whispers that had filled the study. During the day, his concentration faltered, leaving him anxious and irritable. Marianne noticed the change in Henry. Their conversations grew strained, and the once easy camaraderie between them had given way to an awkward tension. She had tried to reassure him, to offer comfort, but her own fears were as palpable as his. The box and the darkness it had unleashed seemed to be pulling them both into a deeper abyss. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the mansion was cloaked in shadow, Marianne arrived at Henry's home with an unexpected urgency. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of determination and dread. "I need to talk to you," she said, as she entered the foyer, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry, who had been pacing the grand hall, looked up in surprise. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Marianne took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly together. "I've been doing some research," she began. "I think I've found something that might help us understand what we're dealing with." Henry's interest was piqued. "What have you discovered?" Marianne reached into her bag and pulled out a worn, leather-bound book. Its cover was embossed with faded gold lettering that read, "The Occult History of Ancient Relics." She opened it to a page marked with a tattered ribbon and pointed to a detailed illustration of an object that looked eerily similar to the one in the box. "This is the figure from the box," Marianne said, her finger tracing the lines of the illustration. "It's called the Shadow Guardian. According to this book, it's an ancient artifact associated with dark rituals. It was believed to be a conduit for malevolent entities, used to summon and control spirits." Henry's eyes widened as he read the accompanying text. The description spoke of ancient rites, forbidden knowledge, and the power of the Shadow Guardian to bind and control dark forces. The words were chilling, painting a picture of a relic steeped in darkness and terror. "But why would my family have something like this?" Henry asked, his voice shaky. Marianne glanced at him, her expression troubled. "The book suggests that such artifacts were often hidden away by those who sought to wield their power for their own gain. It's possible your family acquired the Shadow Guardian through dark means, and now its influence is seeping into your life." Henry felt a wave of despair wash over him. The realization that his family's wealth and power might have been built on such malevolent foundations was overwhelming. He turned to Marianne, his face etched with concern. "What do we do now?" he asked. "How do we stop it?" Marianne took a deep breath. "The book mentions a ritual that can sever the connection between the artifact and the malevolent entity it controls. It requires several steps, including the use of protective symbols and incantations to neutralize the dark energy." Henry's gaze flickered toward the study. "Where do we start?" Marianne nodded toward the book. "We need to gather the materials mentioned here and perform the ritual in the study. We have to be careful, though. The entity might resist, and we need to be prepared for anything." As they gathered the necessary items, candles, protective herbs, and a chalk for drawing the protective symbols, an unsettling quiet settled over the mansion. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to grow thicker, as if the house itself was aware of the impending confrontation. When they were ready, they made their way to the study. The shadows in the room seemed darker than usual, as if they were anticipating the ritual. Henry's hands trembled as he set up the protective circle and placed the candles around the room. Marianne worked beside him, her movements precise and methodical, her face a mask of concentration. Once everything was in place, Marianne began to recite the incantations from the book, her voice steady but tinged with an edge of fear. The protective symbols she drew on the floor seemed to glow faintly, casting an eerie light in the dim room. The atmosphere grew heavy with anticipation, the air charged with a sense of impending confrontation. As the ritual progressed, Henry could feel the temperature in the room dropping. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist, and a low, almost imperceptible hum filled the air. The energy in the room was palpable, a tangible force that pressed against him, as if trying to resist the ritual's power. Suddenly, the shadowy figure materialized again, its form more solid and defined than before. It loomed in the center of the room, its presence a suffocating blanket of darkness. The figure's gaze seemed to pierce through the protective circle, its eyes, or what should have been eyes, glowing with a malevolent light. Marianne's voice wavered as she continued the incantations, her fear evident in her trembling hands. Henry stood by her side, his heart racing, as he tried to hold the line against the dark force. The figure's form shifted and contorted, its shadowy tendrils reaching out as if trying to break free from the circle. For what felt like an eternity, they battled against the darkness. The room was filled with the sound of Marianne's voice and the low hum of the energy as it clashed with the dark force. Henry could feel the pressure building, the sense of dread growing stronger as the figure fought against the protective symbols. Just as it seemed the darkness might overwhelm them, a blinding flash of light erupted from the circle. The shadowy figure let out a scream, a sound of pure, unbridled rage as it was pushed back. The protective symbols flared with a brilliant light, pushing the darkness away and causing the figure to dissolve into a cloud of black smoke. As the light faded, the room fell into an eerie silence. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift, leaving behind a lingering sense of exhaustion and relief. Henry and Marianne stood there, breathless and shaken, but with a glimmer of hope in their eyes. The ritual had been successful in driving back the darkness, but Henry knew that the battle was far from over. The Shadow Guardian was still in the box, and its influence would not be so easily eradicated. But for now, they had won a crucial victory. The immediate threat had been repelled, and they had bought themselves some time to find a permanent solution. Marianne looked at Henry, her face a mixture of fatigue and determination. "We need to find a way to destroy the box," she said. "We can't let this thing continue to hold power over us." Henry nodded, knowing that their fight was not yet finished. The mansion, though quieter, still felt like a battleground, and the darkness that had been awakened would not be so easily vanquished. But with Marianne's help, he was determined to confront it, no matter the cost. As they left the study, Henry felt a renewed sense of resolve. The darkness had revealed its presence, but they had faced it and survived. The battle was far from over, but for now, they had taken the first step toward reclaiming their lives from the shadows that threatened to consume them. The victory in the study had brought a temporary sense of relief, but it was quickly overshadowed by an unsettling realization. The box was still in Henry's possession, and the Shadow Guardian, though driven back, had not been fully vanquished. The mansion seemed to breathe with a renewed sense of dread, the atmosphere heavy with the knowledge that the darkness was not yet gone. Henry and Marianne spent the following days researching the box and the Shadow Guardian with a fervor born of desperation. They scoured old manuscripts, consulted occult experts, and delved into the history of Henry's family, hoping to find a way to destroy the box and rid themselves of the malevolent influence it harbored. Despite their efforts, the answers remained elusive. The box had been part of the family's estate for generations, its origins shrouded in mystery. The historical records were scant, and the few references they found only hinted at the dark nature of the artifact without providing any concrete solutions. One evening, as they pored over ancient texts in the library, Marianne stumbled upon a faded journal tucked away in a dusty corner of a bookshelf. Its leather cover was worn and cracked, the pages yellowed with age. The journal belonged to a distant ancestor of Henry's, a man named Jonathan Hawthorne, who had lived during the early 19th century. Marianne's eyes widened as she flipped through the pages, which were filled with meticulous notes and drawings. The entries detailed various rituals and arcane practices, many of which were centered around dark artifacts and the occult. One entry in particular caught her attention, a detailed account of a ritual performed to contain a malevolent entity. "This," Marianne said, holding up the journal, "this might be what we need." Henry leaned in, his gaze fixed on the page. The ritual described seemed complex, involving a series of steps to both neutralize and banish dark forces. It required specific ingredients, protective symbols, and a ceremonial approach that was unlike anything they had attempted before. The entry also mentioned a particular artifact, the Heart of the Abyss, which was said to be a key component in the ritual. The Heart of the Abyss was described as a powerful relic used to anchor and imprison malevolent entities. According to the journal, it was hidden away by Jonathan Hawthorne to prevent its misuse. "We need to find this Heart of the Abyss," Marianne said with determination. "If it's really as powerful as the journal suggests, it could be the key to destroying the box and the Shadow Guardian once and for all." Henry nodded in agreement. "We'll start by looking into any leads on where it might be hidden. If it's connected to my family's history, there might be clues in the estate or in other records." That night, Henry and Marianne conducted a thorough search of the mansion, focusing on areas that might have been overlooked in their previous investigations. They scoured the attic, the basement, and even the gardens, but the Heart of the Abyss remained elusive. Their search took them to the old family crypt, a somber place beneath the mansion where generations of Hawthorns had been laid to rest. The crypt was dark and damp, its air thick with the smell of decay. Henry felt a chill as they descended the narrow staircase, the weight of history pressing down on him. Inside the crypt, they discovered a small hidden chamber that had been sealed off. Marianne's heart raced as she worked to pry open the ancient door, her flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. As the door creaked open, they were greeted by a musty, stale smell and a sense of foreboding. The chamber was filled with old, dusty artifacts and relics, many of which were covered in cobwebs and layers of grime. In the center of the room, on a pedestal draped with a tattered cloth, lay an ornate box. Its design was intricate, with symbols and carvings that matched those on the Shadow Guardian's box. Marianne approached the pedestal, her hands trembling as she lifted the cloth. Beneath it, they found a small, jewel-encrusted object that resembled the Heart of the Abyss, described in the journal. It was a dark, pulsating gem encased in a metal framework, adorned with arcane symbols. "This has to be it," Marianne said, her voice filled with awe. "The Heart of the Abyss." Henry examined the artifact, feeling a mixture of relief and trepidation. If the Heart of the Abyss was indeed the key to destroying the Shadow Guardian, it would be their best chance to rid themselves of the darkness that had plagued them. But the artifact's malevolent aura made him wary, and he knew that using it would be a risk. "We need to be careful," Henry said. "If this thing is as powerful as the journal suggests, we need to perform the ritual exactly as described. Any mistake could have disastrous consequences." Marianne nodded, her expression resolute. "We'll follow the instructions to the letter. We can't afford any missteps." As they prepared for the final confrontation, the mansion seemed to grow even darker, the shadows lengthening and the air thickening with a palpable sense of dread. Henry and Marianne knew that they were about to face the culmination of their efforts, a battle that would determine the fate of the mansion and their own lives. In the quiet hours before dawn, they set up the ritual in the study once more, the heart of the abyss placed in the center of the protective circle. The room was filled with a tense anticipation as they began the incantations from the journal, their voices steady but tinged with anxiety. The temperature in the room dropped dramatically, and the oppressive presence of the Shadow Guardian seemed to gather strength once more. The air crackled with energy as the darkness began to coalesce, the figure emerging from the shadows with a roar of anger. Henry and Marianne stood firm, their resolve unwavering as they continued the ritual. The heart of the abyss glowed with an intense light, its power clashing with the dark force in the room. The struggle was fierce, the energy swirling in a chaotic dance of light and shadow. As the ritual reached its climax, the heart of the abyss emitted a blinding flash of light, pushing the darkness back with a forceful wave. The Shadow Guardian let out a final, anguished cry before being engulfed by the light, its form dissolving into nothingness. The room fell into a heavy silence, the oppressive atmosphere lifted as the heart of the abyss dimmed. Henry and Marianne, exhausted but triumphant, knew that they had succeeded in their quest. The Shadow Guardian had been banished, and the darkness that had plagued them was finally gone. But even as they celebrated their victory, a lingering question remained. What other secrets lay hidden in the shadows of the mansion? The heart of the abyss had been a powerful tool, but the true extent of its power and the legacy of the Hawthorne family were still shrouded in mystery. For now, though, Henry and Marianne could take solace in the fact that they had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The mansion, though still echoing with the remnants of its haunted past, was once again their home, a place where they could begin to heal and rebuild their lives. As they looked out over the now quiet estate, Henry and Marianne knew that their journey was far from over. The shadows of the past had been confronted, but the future held its own challenges. Together, they would face whatever came next, determined to uncover the truth and find their place in a world forever changed by the darkness they had battled. With the Shadow Guardian banished and the heart of the abyss safely stored away, Henry and Marianne hoped that their troubles were over. The mansion, while still bearing the scars of the dark events, seemed to exhale a sigh of relief. The oppressive atmosphere that had once cloaked every room began to lift, and a tentative sense of normalcy returned. However, their respite was short-lived. Strange occurrences began to plague the mansion once again, more disturbing than before. The shadows in the corners of rooms seemed to twitch and move, and eerie sounds echoed through the halls at night. Henry and Marianne could not shake the feeling that something was amiss. One evening, while Henry was going through the estate's historical records in the library, he stumbled upon a hidden compartment behind a bookshelf. Inside, he found a collection of old letters and documents, all neatly tied with a ribbon. The letters were addressed to Jonathan Hawthorne, the ancestor who had originally documented the heart of the abyss. As Henry read through the letters, a chilling pattern emerged. They detailed an ongoing struggle with dark forces, not just confined to the artifact, but involving a series of malevolent entities that had plagued the Hawthorne family for generations. One letter in particular caught his attention. It was from an unknown correspondent, warning Jonathan about an ancient curse associated with the heart of the abyss. The letter spoke of a curse that could not be fully broken, a dark force that would persist even if the heart was used. According to the letter, the curse was a lingering remnant of the artifact's power, and as long as the heart remained in existence, the dark forces would seek to reclaim it. Henry's heart sank as he realized the implications. The curse was not merely a physical presence, but an insidious force that could continue to haunt them, regardless of their efforts to neutralize it. The realization that their victory was not as complete as they had hoped weighed heavily on him. Marianne, who had been working in the garden to clear her mind, joined Henry in the library when he called her. Her face was flushed with concern as Henry relayed the details of the letter.
"This curse," she said, her voice trembling, "it means the darkness is still trying to find a way back. We've only dealt with one aspect of it, but there's more we need to understand."
Henry nodded, his expression grave. "We need to find out exactly what this curse entails and how to counter it. If we don't, the darkness could return stronger than before." Determined to uncover more, Henry and Marianne redoubled their efforts. They revisited the old records, seeking any additional clues about the curse and its origins. They also reached out to experts in the occult, hoping to gain further insight into the nature of the curse and how to break it. Their research led them to a series of obscure texts that hinted at an ancient order known as the Guardians of the Veil. This order, according to the texts, was tasked with guarding against dark forces and curses, including those associated with powerful artifacts like the Heart of the Abyss. One night, as they pored over a particularly old manuscript, Marianne found a reference to a guardian named Elias Hawthorne, who was said to have played a key role in containing a similar curse centuries ago. The manuscript detailed a ritual performed by Elias to seal away the dark force, but it required a rare component known as the Light of the Ancients. The Light of the Ancients was described as a sacred relic with the power to neutralize curses and dispel dark entities. It was said to be hidden away in a remote location, far from the reach of malevolent forces. "This could be our answer," Marianne said, her eyes alight with hope. "If we can find the Light of the Ancients, it might help us lift the curse and put an end to the darkness once and for all." Henry agreed, but the task ahead was daunting. Finding the Light of the Ancients would require traveling to distant locations and deciphering ancient clues. The search would be perilous, and the risk of encountering dark forces along the way was high. They prepared for their journey with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The mansion, though now quiet, still held a lingering sense of foreboding. As they packed their supplies and gathered what they would need, Henry and Marianne could not shake the feeling that their quest was only beginning. Before they left, they performed a final ritual to strengthen the protective wards around the mansion. The last thing they wanted was for the curse to find a way back into their home while they were away. The ritual was both physically and emotionally taxing, but it was essential to safeguard their sanctuary. With their preparations complete, Henry and Marianne set out on their journey, guided by the clues they had uncovered. The path to finding the Light of the Ancients would take them through forgotten ruins, ancient libraries, and remote locations steeped in history and mystery. As they traveled, the darkness that had once haunted them seemed to follow in the shadows, a constant reminder of the curse they sought to lift. The journey was fraught with danger, but their resolve was unwavering. They knew that the stakes were high, and the darkness would not rest until it had reclaimed what it had lost. Their quest was not just a search for a relic, but a battle against a curse that had lingered through the ages. Henry and Marianne were determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The fate of the mansion, their lives, and the very fabric of their reality depended on their success. Henry and Marianne's journey to find the Light of the Ancients took them far from the safety of the mansion. Their travels led them through remote villages, ancient ruins, and cryptic landmarks, each step bringing them closer to the elusive relic. Despite their determination, the path was fraught with challenges and dangers, each encounter a test of their resolve. One evening, they arrived at a secluded monastery deep within a dense forest. The monastery was said to be a repository of ancient knowledge, and they hoped it might hold the key to finding the Light of the Ancients. The monks, who had lived in isolation for centuries, were wary of outsiders, but agreed to help after hearing their story. The abbot of the monastery, a stern but wise man named Brother Alaric, listened intently as Henry and Marianne recounted their experiences. His eyes darkened with concern as they spoke of the curse and the heart of the abyss. "Your plight is grave," Brother Alaric said, his voice heavy with gravity. "The light of the ancients is a relic of immense power, but it is not easily found. Its location has been hidden away, protected by layers of magic and secrecy." He led them to a hidden chamber beneath the monastery, where ancient texts and scrolls were stored. The chamber was filled with an eerie quiet, the air thick with the scent of old parchment and incense. Brother Alaric explained that the light of the ancients was linked to a series of riddles and clues scattered across various sacred sites. As Henry and Marianne delved into the texts, they discovered that each clue was tied to a location imbued with significant historical and mystical importance. The texts outlined a series of trials that would test their courage, wisdom, and faith. Only by overcoming these trials could they hope to uncover the relic's hidden location. Their first trial took them to an ancient cave system, rumored to be the resting place of a long-forgotten guardian. The cave was dark and treacherous, filled with narrow passages and subterranean rivers. As they ventured deeper, they encountered a series of obstacles, puzzles etched into the cave walls, shifting pathways, and eerie echoes that seemed to mock their efforts. Despite the challenges, Henry and Marianne persevered. They solved the puzzles with increasing skill and determination, each success bringing them closer to their goal. The cave's oppressive darkness seemed to close in around them, but their resolve remained unshaken. After days of exploration, they emerged from the cave with a crucial clue, a cryptic symbol that pointed to the next location in their quest. Exhausted but determined, they continued their journey, following the symbol's guidance. Their next destination was an ancient observatory perched on a desolate mountaintop. The observatory, though dilapidated, was a repository of astronomical knowledge and held clues about the light of the ancients. They spent days studying the observatory's charts and writings, deciphering star maps and celestial alignments. During their time at the observatory, they faced another trial, a mysterious storm that seemed to be a manifestation of the curse's lingering presence. The storm raged around them, its howling winds and blinding lightning creating a nightmarish landscape. Yet, amidst the chaos, Henry and Marianne focused on their task, using the storm's energy to uncover hidden messages within the observatory's records. With each clue they uncovered, the trials grew more intense, the darkness more palpable. The curse's influence seemed to grow stronger, manifesting in unsettling visions and disturbing phenomena. It was as if the dark force was aware of their quest and was determined to thwart their efforts. Despite the mounting challenges, Henry and Marianne pressed on. Their journey took them to ancient temples, forgotten libraries, and sacred groves, each location revealing new pieces of the puzzle. Along the way, they encountered others who had been touched by the curse, people who had experienced similar supernatural disturbances and were seeking their own answers. Their encounters with these individuals revealed a pattern. The curse was not only targeting them, but had a broader reach, affecting anyone who came into contact with the heart of the abyss or its remnants. The darkness seemed to have a life of its own, spreading its influence wherever it could. As they approached the final stage of their journey, Henry and Marianne reached a secluded valley hidden within a misty mountain range. The valley was said to be the resting place of the light of the ancients, protected by a series of trials designed to test the worthiness of those who sought it. The trials were arduous, demanding not only physical endurance but also inner strength and resolve. They faced illusions that preyed on their deepest fears, confrontations with shadowy figures that seemed to embody their darkest thoughts, and puzzles that tested their ability to remain focused under pressure. With each trial, the curse's influence grew more pronounced, manifesting as a pervasive sense of dread and an almost palpable pressure on their minds. The darkness seemed to seep into their very souls, challenging their determination and threatening to overwhelm them. But through sheer will and mutual support, Henry and Marianne managed to navigate the trials. Their bond grew stronger with each challenge, their trust in one another unwavering. They knew that their quest was not just a search for a relic, but a test of their courage and resilience. At last, they arrived at the heart of the valley, where the light of the ancients awaited them. The relic was encased in a pedestal of ancient stone, bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. Its presence was both beautiful and awe-inspiring, a beacon of hope in the midst of the darkness they had faced. Henry and Marianne approached the relic with a mixture of relief and reverence. The light of the ancients was their last hope to lift the curse and put an end to the darkness that had plagued them. They knew that retrieving it was only the beginning. They would need to perform the final ritual with precision and care to ensure its effectiveness. As they prepared to return to the mansion with the light of the ancients, they could feel the curse's lingering presence, a reminder of the trials they had endured. The journey had tested their limits, but their determination and courage had carried them through. With the light of the ancients in their possession, Henry and Marianne knew that their final confrontation with the curse was imminent. They returned to the mansion ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that their fight was far from over. Henry and Marianne returned to the mansion, the light of the ancients securely in their possession. The atmosphere was tense, the mansion's oppressive air seeming to thicken with each step they took. The trials they had faced on their journey had left them weary, but their resolve was stronger than ever. They knew that the final ritual would be the most critical and dangerous part of their quest. The mansion, though seemingly quiet, felt different. The shadows seemed to pulse with an ominous energy, and strange occurrences began to intensify. Whispers echoed through the halls, and cold drafts swept through rooms that had been sealed tight. It was as if the darkness was aware of their return and was preparing for a final, desperate stand. In the study, where the heart of the abyss had first been confronted, Henry and Marianne set up for the ritual. The room was arranged with meticulous care. Protective symbols were drawn on the floor, and the light of the ancients was placed in the center of a newly consecrated circle. The ancient texts from Brother Alaric's monastery guided them, their detailed instructions crucial to the ritual's success. The night was dark, and a heavy silence settled over the mansion as Henry and Marianne began the ritual. They chanted incantations from the ancient texts, their voices steady but filled with underlying tension. The light of the ancients cast a soft golden glow, its light contrasting starkly with the encroaching shadows. As they worked, the darkness in the mansion seemed to respond. The air grew colder and the shadows lengthened, coalescing into a more defined form. The Shadow Guardian, though defeated before, began to reappear, its malevolent presence more formidable and enraged. Henry and Marianne could feel the intensity of the darkness mounting, the air thick with a sense of impending doom. The Shadow Guardian's form emerged from the darkness, its eyes glowing with a fierce, malevolent light. It seemed to writhe and shift, its shadowy tendrils reaching out toward them with a menacing hiss. With unwavering determination, Henry and Marianne continued the ritual, their voices rising above the noise of the dark force. The light of the ancients blazed brighter, its energy pushing back against the encroaching darkness. The protective symbols on the floor glowed with a powerful radiance, creating a barrier that repelled the shadows. The Shadow Guardian's rage was palpable, its form swirling and distorting as it tried to breach the protective circle. It roared in fury, its dark energy clashing with the light of the relic. The struggle was fierce, the room shaking with the force of the battle between light and darkness. In the midst of the chaos, Marianne noticed a pattern in the Shadow Guardian's movements. It seemed to be drawn to certain areas of the room where the darkness was more concentrated. She realized that the relic's light was strongest in specific locations and quickly directed Henry to adjust their positioning. As they moved the light of the ancients to the designated spots, the Guardian's form began to falter. The light's intensity forced it to shrink back, its power waning with each shift. Henry and Marianne pressed on, their focus unbreakable as they completed the final stages of the ritual. With a final, decisive chant, the light of the ancients emitted a brilliant burst of energy. The room was filled with a blinding radiance as the light overwhelmed the Shadow Guardian. The darkness writhed and twisted in agony before being engulfed by the light, its form dissolving into nothingness. The room fell into a heavy silence as the light dimmed, leaving only the faint glow of the relic. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of profound relief. The shadows that had once haunted the mansion were gone, and the lingering curse had been lifted. Henry and Marianne, exhausted but triumphant, stood in the quiet aftermath of the confrontation. The mansion, though still bearing the marks of its dark past, felt different. The air was lighter, and the oppressive energy that had pervaded every corner had dissipated. They took a moment to reflect on their journey, their minds still reeling from the intense experience. The trials they had faced had tested their limits, but they had succeeded in their quest. The heart of the abyss had been neutralized, and the curse that had plagued the Hawthorne family for generations had been broken. As dawn broke over the estate, Henry and Marianne knew that their fight was over, at least for now. The mansion, though scarred by its past, was once again their home, a place where they could begin to heal and rebuild. With the light of the ancients safely secured and the darkness vanquished, Henry and Marianne faced the future with a renewed sense of hope. They understood that the journey had changed them, and they were prepared to face whatever came next with courage and determination. The shadows of the past had been confronted, and the mansion stood as a testament to their strength and resilience. As they looked out over the estate, they knew that their story was not just one of darkness and struggle, but also of triumph and redemption. Together, they would embrace the future, knowing that they had faced the darkest of forces and emerged victorious. The mansion was no longer just a place of haunted memories, but a symbol of their enduring spirit and their ability to overcome even the greatest of challenges.